coming up on today's show. With the Catholic Church having a new leader, we'll talk with Raffi Andonian about the conclave right after the break.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back into North Dakota today. With the new Pope now settling in, we are taking this historic moment with the first American Pope to take a look at the history of the position and get to know more about the background of one of the oldest institutions in the world. Here joining us via Zoom to share more is celebrity historian Raffi Andonian. Good morning.
Well, good morning. Here I am. What a moment, right?
Yes, here he is. Well, we are so excited to chat. So we know that the new Pope chose Leo for his name. Who were some of the previous generation's Pope Leo?
Yeah, he's certainly tapping into a big legacy here when he chose Leo. You know, Pope Francis prior to him was the first Francis, but Leo, he's number 14, so there's a lot of Leos before him. We'll pick a few to give you an idea of how influential. Leo, of course, means lion when you think about it, so that already tells you, projecting very powerful symbol. Now, Leo the First was one of the first popes, one of the earliest popes of the Catholic Church, very influential. These are the years when the Catholic Church was trying to, continue to gain influence across the various pagan cultures across the Mediterranean, Europe, etc. And so very influential. Actually, Pope Leo the First is one of very few one of three popes to get the name the Great after him. He's considered a doctor of the church, which is kind of another level even beyond a saint. That's how influential he was, establishing or I would say kind of popularizing the doctrine of the duality of Christ as both human and divine. There are some other interesting Leos too. Leo III, for example, is who crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor, Charlemagne, to recognize the head of the state as the head, with the head of the church at the same time, connecting those things. So Leo III, a few centuries after the very foundational Leo I, it's also very valuable and influential. And it set up some problems because a couple hundred years later, when Pope Leo IX came, this is when you had the Great Schism. So when there was more Roman Empire power shifting to the east, to Constantinople, for example, there was increasing, if you will, power struggle and power shift to the east in the question of where the power center is. Well, in Constantinople, you have this schism underneath Pope Leo IX that happens, where you have this split of the Eastern Roman Empire. And if you think about it, to this day, this is a concern. So, for example, if you look at Pope Leo, the current Pope Leo's Twitter account, which I was just looking at, there's a couple of tweets on there talking about the importance of Christians in the East. So there's still this consideration of East and West. And finally, let's talk about Pope Leo X, who was the one who excommunicated Martin Luther. So speaking of schisms, this is a different kind of schism. This is the start of Protestantism. We're talking about the 16th century when Martin Luther was criticizing some of what he saw as corruption in the church, and also wanted to focus on sort of a personal connection to God. That's why Protestants believe in reading the Bible directly as opposed to following an institution. And so Martin Luther was excommunicated by Pope Leo X as a result of that. And you had the rise and the birth of Protestantism, starting with Lutheranism. And so to this day, of course, that influences religions across the world, and certainly here in the United States, where we kind of, I think, draw our notion of liberty of conscience from that Protestant tradition of Martin Luther.
I love it. And speaking of these United States, Pope Leo is our first American Pope. Let's chat about that.
Yeah, what's funny about that is I would draw the start of the United States to the Pope in some ways, or Catholicism. Let me give you a funny example you might not think about. How about Christopher Columbus in 1492? In the same year there was known as the Reconquista in Spain, which is the Iberian Peninsula, had sort of a patchwork of Muslim and Catholic kingdoms, including some Jewish population as well, for centuries prior, but until 1492, when it was united under one Catholic kingdom in 1492. So when Columbus showed up to the Spanish crown and said, hey, do you mind funding me for this voyage across the ocean that I'm trying to do? Well, they did, because they were feeling pretty confident about themselves, having just reconquered the Iberian Peninsula to unite into a Catholic kingdom. So you could tie sort of this whole thing we have in the Western Hemisphere to Columbus and the Reconquista. But The funny thing is, when we became the United States, we were not very friendly to Catholics. I'll give you a couple funny examples. Up in New England, for example, with the Puritans, they were running away from the Church of England, which was based on the Catholic Church, because they thought it was too decadent, too many of these pagan practices, too much partying around Christmas. And so they wanted to do a more muted version of Christianity, to be more pure. As a result of that, when the United States comes around, there's a lot of suspicion of Catholics. For example, the colony of Maryland, which was established to protect, or if you will, have a haven for Catholics with Lord Baltimore, was eventually taken over by Protestants, who then persecuted and even kicked out Catholics. Although by the time of the Declaration of Independence, you have Charles Carroll, who's the only signer of the Declaration of Independence, who's Catholic. So there was some Catholic presence still, of course, in Maryland, but there was this conflict of Catholic and Protestant, even in a Catholic established colony, until you have Thomas Jefferson in the Revolutionary period, who writes the Statute of Religious Freedom for the state of Virginia, which becomes the model for the U.S. Constitution later. And that was a key part of saying, hey, let's have what they would call religious toleration, religious freedom, which is this idea that you're not going to have to subscribe to one church, pay a tithe, or have some sort of religious litmus test. In fact, it was Jefferson, he had only three things put on his epitaph, on his grave, and it was not being president, by the way. It was author of the Declaration of Independence, it was founder of the University of Virginia because he believed in education, and author of the Statute of Religious Freedom. That's how important this was. And yet, despite the religious freedom, there was still actually suspicion of Catholics in the early republic, because there was this question of, are they going to be loyal to a foreign prince? That's what they would call the Pope, this foreign prince. And if you think about it, there was some of that all the way into JFK, for example. John F. Kennedy, there were questions of, is he going to answer to a foreign prince, or are loyalties to here in the United States? In fact, I didn't say even in my lifetime, Mitt Romney in 2008 had to give a speech. Now, he's not Catholic, he's Mormon, but there was still this question of, as a presidential candidate, where is his loyalty going to be? Is it going to be to the church or to the nation state? So we're not totally away from these questions and issues. And think about now with an American Pope, there are these questions, not necessarily of loyalty, but these questions of where does the United States fit into the picture, kind of the reverse, if you will, now looking from the papacy over the United States. So these questions are intertwined with the story of America, whether you're looking at Columbus, whether you're looking at the colony of Maryland and the struggle there, and the establishment of religious freedom, and all the way to these questions of loyalty. And in fact, I'd even point out to some of the early peoples that we discriminated against, like the Irish, for example, was in part because they were Catholic. Protestant Irish who arrived earlier did not deal with the same discrimination as Catholic Irish did, or Catholic Italians did. So it's been a part of the story of this country. So I think it's particularly significant to have a Pope from the Americas, from both North and South America, and of course from the United States, he is both, to be in the papacy now.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for joining us, giving us so much insight. This truly was so interesting. We always appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It's certainly a symbol that influences the whole world, has much history. Thanks for having me on this historic moment.
Yes, we appreciate it. We can check you out on social media as well as the celebrity historian, so our viewers make sure to do that at home. But stick around, we have your daily dose of motivation after this short break.